twilight hours of American military history, when the fog of war settles over classified installations and forgotten corridors, some secrets refuse to remain buried. They surface decades later in manila folders stamped with security classifications that have finally expired, revealing glimpses of experiments that push the boundaries of human understanding and perhaps human safety. The Cold War wasn't fought only with missiles and submarines. It was waged in sterile laboratory rooms, isolated desert compounds, and the depths of human consciousness itself. While the world focused on nuclear deterrence and space races, American military researchers were exploring territories that existed beyond the reach of conventional science. Territories where the line between breakthrough discovery and dangerous folly becomes dangerously thin. Recently declassified documents from the Department of Defense have revealed a collection of experimental programs conducted between 1952 and 1987. These weren't the well-documented MK-Ultra operations or the publicized sleep studies. These files detail smaller, compartmentalized projects with innocuous code names. Sensory Gate, Deep Current, Nightfall Protocol. What makes these particular experiments remarkable isn't just their classified nature, but the pattern of testimonies that accompany them. Accounts from military personnel who participated describe experiences that venture far beyond the scope of conventional psychological research. Experiences that suggest some aspects of human consciousness remain unexplored, and perhaps unexplorable, by modern science. Tonight, we examine 3 declassified reports, each representing a different facility, a different decade, and a different approach to expanding the limits of human awareness. We've cross-referenced official documentation with surviving witness accounts, medical records, and facility logs that paint a disturbing picture of what our government discovered when they began opening doors that may have been better left closed. The paperwork confirms these experiments took place. The question that haunts the classified archives is simple. What exactly did they find in those sterile rooms and isolated compounds? And why were the programs terminated so abruptly when subjects reported making contact with something beyond the boundaries of normal human perception? If you're new here and these true accounts from the classified archives intrigue you, consider subscribing. There are more stories waiting in the shadows of military history. Now, let's step into the fog of war and examine what happens when scientific curiosity meets the unknown territories of human consciousness. The autumn of 1963 brought more than changing leaves to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Deep within the sprawling military installation, past the routine training grounds and administrative buildings, a converted medical wing in Building 7 Alpha housed one of the Army's most ambitious and ultimately most disturbing consciousness research programs. Project Sensory Gate emerged from Cold War doctrine that emphasized the critical importance of situational awareness in combat. Military strategists theorized that soldiers who could detect enemy presence through enhanced sensory perception would possess decisive advantages in jungle warfare environments like Vietnam. The concept seemed reasonable. Train elite paratroopers to expand their natural awareness beyond normal human limits. Dr. Margaret Eisenhardt, a former OSS psychologist who had worked with resistance fighters during World War II, led the research team. Her background in wartime psychology made her uniquely qualified to understand the mental pressures that combat soldiers faced. What she couldn't have anticipated was that her consciousness expansion protocols would unlock something far more complex than enhanced battlefield awareness. The facility itself reflected military efficiency and scientific precision. Building 7 Alpha's converted medical wing consisted of sterile corridors lined with white-painted cinder-block walls and industrial-grade ventilation systems that hummed constantly with mechanical efficiency. The sensory deprivation chambers occupied the building's interior spaces. constructed with double-wall insulation designed to eliminate sound transmission and lined with materials that absorbed electromagnetic frequencies. 12 volunteers from the 82nd Airborne participated in Sensory Gate over 8 months. These weren't random selections. Each man had been chosen for psychological stability, above-average intelligence scores, and demonstrated ability to remain calm under extreme stress. They understood they were participating in classified research that could enhance American military capabilities during a critical period of global tension. Sergeant First Class Robert Chen, one of only 3 surviving participants, provided his account of the program in a 2019 interview, nearly 6 decades after his involvement. His testimony offers a disturbing window into what began as routine military research and evolved into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human consciousness. "They told us we were helping develop new techniques for jungle warfare," Chen recalled. "Ways to sense ambushes before they happened. Seemed reasonable enough. We'd spend hours in these sensory deprivation chambers. Complete darkness, complete silence. They'd monitor our brain waves while we tried to expand our awareness," they called it. The chambers themselves measured exactly 8 feet by 12 feet, containing only a medical examination chair, surrounded by monitoring equipment that recorded everything from brain activity to heart rate variability. Participants described the air as perpetually cool and somehow thick, carrying an antiseptic smell that seemed to coat the back of their throats. Temperature logs show the chambers were maintained at precisely 68 degrees Fahrenheit, yet multiple subjects reported sudden temperature drops during their sessions, drops that weren't registered by the facility's monitoring equipment. For the first few weeks, Chen's experiences aligned with Dr. Eisenhardt's expectations. The first few sessions were almost meditative, he remembered. But by week 3, something changed. I started sensing things that shouldn't have been there. In that black, silent room, I'd suddenly know someone had entered. Not Dr. Eisenhardt or her assistants, but someone else. Someone who felt wrong. According to declassified medical reports, 12 soldiers participated in Sensory Gate over 8 months. 7 completed the full protocol. Of those 7, 5 reported what researchers documented as non-localized awareness events, the sensation of detecting presences that weren't physically there. Initially, Dr. Eisenhardt's team attributed these experiences to expected psychological effects of prolonged sensory deprivation. However, facility security logs from that period reveal an unusual pattern that couldn't be easily explained by conventional psychology. Door sensors throughout the experimental wing triggered unexplained access alerts, electronic records of entries and exits with no corresponding video evidence of personnel movement. These alerts occurred most frequently during active experimental sessions, suggesting some form of environmental disturbance that security cameras couldn't detect. Chen's experiences intensified as the program progressed. I'd call out, "Who's there?" and they'd turn on the lights. Empty room, just me strapped to the chair, but the feeling never left, like invisible eyes studying every thought in my head. By his 6th week, Chen reported not just sensing invisible presences, but receiving what he described as impressions, fragments of thoughts or emotions that didn't belong to him. The psychological boundary between his own mental state and something external began to dissolve in ways that alarmed both him and Dr. Eisenhardt's research team. During one session, I suddenly felt overwhelmed with sadness, Chen testified. Not my sadness, someone else's. Deep, crushing grief like losing a child. I'd never experienced anything like it. When they pulled me out, I was sobbing, but I couldn't explain why. Dr. Eisenhardt documented this incident with unusual excitement. Chen recalled her saying his brain activity during that episode showed patterns they'd never recorded before. She took extensive notes on everything he described, asking detailed questions about the emotional impressions he'd received from unknown sources. It was during this period that Chen realized the scope of the experiments extended beyond his own participation. That's when I realized we weren't the only test subjects. There were others in rooms down the hall, rooms I'd never seen. Sometimes, when they walked me to my chamber, I'd catch glimpses of other doors with different numbers, different sounds coming from behind them. The final session in Chen's program occurred on October the 23rd, 1963. According to his testimony, he experienced what Dr. Eisenhardt's notes describe as breakthrough contact, a session where he claims to have communicated directly with one of the unseen presences that had haunted his previous experiences. It spoke to me, not in words, but I understood it perfectly, Chen recalled. It said it had been waiting for someone who could hear it. It said there were others, trapped in the spaces between. It said the experiments weren't expanding our consciousness. They were opening doors that should have stayed closed. When Chen emerged from that final session, the atmosphere in Building 7 Alpha had changed dramatically. Dr. Eisenhardt was engaged in what appeared to be an urgent phone conversation with military superiors. Chen overheard fragments of the discussion that suggested the research had achieved results far beyond its intended scope. When I came out of that session, Dr. Eisenhardt was arguing with someone on the phone, Chen remembered. I heard her say, "We're not prepared for this level of contact." 3 days later, they shut down the entire program. Project Sensory Gate officially ended in November 1963, according to declassified documents. Dr. Eisenhardt's final report, heavily redacted even after declassification, concludes that the experiments achieved unexpected results requiring further evaluation under enhanced security protocols. Chen never saw Dr. Eisenhardt again, and his medical records from Fort Bragg remain classified above his current security clearance. The lasting impact of his participation continues to affect Chen decades later. "I still feel them sometimes, especially in quiet rooms," he admitted during his 2019 interview. "They're still out there, still waiting." If Chen's account represents accurate testimony rather than psychological aftermath of extreme sensory deprivation, the Army may have stumbled onto something far beyond their intended research scope. What exactly they discovered and whether it remains contained within those sealed files is a question that haunts the sterile halls of Building 7 Alpha to this day. "60 miles northeast of Las Vegas, where the Mojave Desert stretches endlessly toward distant mountain ranges, the landscape itself seems designed for psychological pressure. It was in this desolate environment that the Army established Yucca Lake Research Station in 1970, a facility that officially didn't exist and conducted research that pushed the boundaries of human endurance in ways that may have irreversibly changed the participants. Project Deep Current emerged from Cold War strategic thinking that emphasized the need for soldiers capable of operating alone behind enemy lines for extended periods. Military planners recognized that future conflicts might require personnel who could maintain operational effectiveness during prolonged isolation without radio contact, resupply, or psychological support. The ability to function alone in hostile territory for weeks or months could provide decisive intelligence advantages. The research facility at Yucca Lake appeared on no public maps and received supplies through military channels that obscured its true purpose. Built ostensibly as a seismic monitoring station, the compound actually housed a sophisticated isolation research program designed to test the psychological limits of human solitude. Dr. Samuel Patterson, the project's lead psychiatrist, theorized that extended isolation would force subjects to develop enhanced mental resilience and self-reliance. His hypothesis suggested that humans possessed untapped psychological reserves that could be accessed through carefully controlled sensory deprivation and social isolation. What he discovered instead was that the human mind, when deprived of external stimulation, sometimes creates its own company, and that company isn't always benevolent. The Nevada compound existed in a landscape that amplified psychological pressure through sheer environmental hostility. Endless expanses of gray desert stretched beyond every horizon, broken only by distant mountain ranges that appeared to shift position depending on the time of day and atmospheric conditions. The facility's isolation chambers were constructed from converted shipping containers, buried partially underground to provide protection from desert temperature extremes while maintaining the psychological impact of complete solitude. Technical Sergeant Linda Morrison, U.S. Army Signal Corps, volunteered for the Deep Current program in the summer of 1971. Her daily logs, recently declassified along with other project documentation, provide a disturbing window into the experiment's progression and the gradual dissolution of normal psychological boundaries under extreme isolation. Each isolation compound measured 20 feet by 8 feet, containing basic survival amenities: a cot, desk, food supplies, water recycling system, and monitoring equipment that recorded everything from heart rate to sleep patterns. Solar panels provided minimal electrical power for lighting and ventilation systems that maintained breathable temperatures despite the desert's extreme conditions. The perimeter was marked by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, though what it was designed to keep in or out was never clearly defined. Morrison's early log entries reflect the routine psychological adaptations that Dr. Patterson expected from prolonged isolation. Day 8. Routine holding steady. Food supplies adequate. Communications equipment functioning but still under orders not to use except for emergency. The silence out here is absolute, not like anywhere I've ever been. No birds, no insects, just wind and my own breathing. Facility records show that 12 subjects participated in the full 45-day isolation protocol. Each compound was positioned 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, with no visual or audio contact possible between participants. Motion sensors and cameras monitored the immediate area around each compound, feeding data back to a control facility 10 miles away, where Dr. Patterson's team observed the subject's psychological deterioration in real time. By day 19, Morrison's logs began documenting the psychological phenomena that Dr. Patterson had anticipated. Started talking to myself today, not just thinking out loud, actual conversations. Asked myself questions and found myself answering in a different voice. Dr. Patterson warned this might happen, still within normal psychological parameters. However, Morrison's experiences began deviating from expected patterns as the isolation period extended. Day 27. Something's wrong with the perimeter alarms. They've been triggering every night around 0300 hours, but when I check the monitors, there's nothing there. Just empty desert. Could be equipment malfunction, but the timing is too consistent. Dr. Patterson's theoretical models predicted that subjects would develop internal dialogues as coping mechanisms for extreme solitude. What he hadn't anticipated was that these internal conversations would sometimes demonstrate independent knowledge and consciousness that seemed to exist separately from the subject's own mental processes. Morrison's Day 34 entry marked a critical turning point in her psychological state. The conversations are getting longer. The other voice, I'm calling her Charlie, knows things I don't remember telling her. She knew about the scar on my knee from when I was 7, knew my grandmother's maiden name. I'm starting to think Charlie isn't part of me at all. Of the 12 subjects who completed the full protocol, 9 reported experiencing what Dr. Patterson documented as secondary personality emergence. Internal voices that seem to possess independent knowledge and consciousness. Initially, he attributed these phenomena to predictable psychological responses to extreme isolation, but the consistency of the reports and the specific nature of the experiences suggested something more complex. Morrison's psychological deterioration accelerated after day 30, when her logs began describing increasingly complex interactions with Charlie. Charlie told me something today that I can't stop thinking about. She said the other subjects, the ones in the other containers, some of them aren't alone anymore either. She said she's been talking to their others during the night shifts when I'm asleep. The implications of Morrison's account troubled Dr. Patterson's research team. If accurate, her testimony suggested that the isolation subjects were developing some form of shared psychological experience that transcended their physical separation. Morrison continued, "She says the isolation isn't creating new personalities. It's opening us up to something that was already there, waiting. She says the desert is full of voices that have been waiting for someone to listen." Day 40 brought Morrison's most disturbing report. Checked the perimeter cameras myself today. Frame-by-frame analysis of last night's 0300 alarm. For just one frame, less than a second, there's a shadow near the northeast sensor. Not human-shaped. Too tall, too angular. Charlie laughs when I mention it. She says I'm finally starting to see what she's been seeing all along. Morrison's final log entry was recorded on day 43, 2 days before her scheduled extraction. Charlie isn't just in my head anymore. I saw her reflection in the bathroom mirror this morning. Not my reflection, hers. Different face, different hair, different eyes. She was smiling at me. The entry concluded with Morrison's growing realization that her participation in Deep Current had fundamentally altered her in ways that couldn't be reversed. She told me the experiments aren't ending when I leave here. She's coming with me. All of the others are going with their subjects. Dr. Patterson thinks he's been studying isolation, but he's been conducting recruitment. Morrison's final words reflected a terror that extended beyond her individual experience. "I'm scared to leave this place, but I'm more scared to stay." Charlie says it doesn't matter either way now. She says the door's already open and it can't be closed. If anyone reads this, know that we volunteered for psychological testing. We didn't volunteer to become hosts. Morrison was extracted on schedule after 45 days. Her psychological evaluation noted mild dissociative symptoms consistent with prolonged isolation, and she was cleared for return to active duty within 6 weeks. Project Deep Current concluded in 1973, with all subjects reportedly returning to normal psychological baselines within 90 days of extraction. However, VA medical records tell a different story. 8 of the 12 participants later sought treatment for what they described as persistent auditory hallucinations that began during their desert isolation and continued for years afterward. Whether these experiences represent predictable psychological responses to extreme isolation or something more disturbing remains buried in classified medical files. The Yucca Lake facility was permanently abandoned in 1974, and the site remains off-limits to civilian access. If Morrison's account is accurate, the desert may still harbor whatever entities made contact with isolated human minds during those 45 days of profound solitude. 300 feet beneath the Pacific Ocean, enclosed within a steel tube that represented the only barrier between 96 men and crushing death, the USS Blackfin conducted what may have been the most psychologically dangerous experiment in American military history. The submarine's 1978 patrol mission officially focused on Cold War surveillance operations in the North Pacific. Unofficially, half the crew served as unwitting subjects in Project Deepwatch, an experimental program that explored the boundaries of collective human consciousness under extreme confinement. The Navy's partnership with Army psychological research units reflected growing interest in enhancing crew performance during extended underwater deployments. Submarine warfare demanded unprecedented levels of psychological endurance, with crews spending months submerged in conditions that tested the limits of human adaptability. Military strategists theorized that crews who developed enhanced collective awareness might demonstrate superior operational effectiveness during critical missions. Captain Michael Torino, commanding officer of the Blackfin, received briefings indicating his crew would participate in advanced psychological monitoring protocols during their 90-day patrol mission. What he wasn't told was that Dr. Sarah Fleming, a Navy psychiatrist with extensive background in experimental psychology, had selected half his crew as test subjects for consciousness expansion experiments that had never been attempted in operational conditions. The submarine environment itself intensified the psychological pressure inherent in Dr. Fleming's research. The Blackfin operated at depths between 400 and 800 feet below the surface, a cramped steel vessel containing 96 men in space smaller than most suburban houses. Narrow corridors lined with pipes, cables, and electrical equipment hummed constantly with mechanical activity, while air recycling systems maintained breathable atmosphere despite the crushing ocean pressure surrounding their fragile metal shell. Dr. Fleming's experimental sessions took place in the forward torpedo room, the largest available space aboard the submarine, though still severely constrained by surface standards. 12 crew members would sit cross-legged on metal deck plates, surrounded by torpedo tubes and their deadly cargo, while she guided them through exercises designed to blur the boundaries between individual consciousness. Petty Officer Second Class David Kowalski, sonar technician aboard the Blackfin, maintained a personal journal during the mission, a violation of naval protocol that may have preserved crucial evidence of what transpired during those underwater experiments. His entries document the gradual transformation of routine submarine operations into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and the nature of reality itself. Week 3. Dr. Fleming has been running these awareness enhancement sessions in the torpedo room after dinner. 12 of us sit in a circle while she guides us through what she calls group consciousness exercises, supposed to help us work better as a team during long deployments. Kowalski's initial impressions reflected the benign nature of Dr. Fleming's stated objectives. It's actually kind of relaxing. We close our eyes and try to sense what the others are thinking or feeling. Sounds crazy, but some of the guys seem to be getting good at it. Johnson correctly guessed what Morrison was thinking about 3 times in a row yesterday. Dr. Fleming's hypothesis suggested that confined groups might develop enhanced empathic connections as a survival adaptation. Her theoretical framework assumed that extreme isolation would force crew members to establish deeper psychological bonds that could improve coordination and reduce conflict during extended deployments. What she hadn't anticipated was that removing barriers between individual minds might allow access to consciousness that existed beyond the submarine's steel hull. By week 6, Kowalski's journal entries documented phenomena that extended far beyond Dr. Fleming's experimental parameters. Something strange happened during today's session. We were doing the usual group sensing exercise when suddenly everyone opened their eyes at the same time. Not because Dr. Fleming said to, we all just knew the exercise was over. She looked surprised, almost worried. The incident troubled other participants as well. Rodriguez approached Kowalski privately after the session, describing experiences that suggested the crew's consciousness was merging in ways that transcended normal human psychology. Later, Rodriguez came to me privately. He said during the session he could hear all of our thoughts simultaneously, like multiple radio stations playing at once. I didn't tell him that I'd experienced the same thing. Ship's logs from this period indicate that crew efficiency improved dramatically as the psychological boundaries between individuals began dissolving. Watch changes occurred with unprecedented synchronization, emergency drills executed with almost telepathic coordination, and disciplinary incidents dropped to 0. However, medical logs from the same period show increasing reports of sleep disturbances, anxiety attacks, and what the ship's doctor documented as shared nightmare phenomena. Multiple crew members reporting identical disturbing dreams. Week 9 brought Kowalski's most disturbing observations. The awareness exercises stopped 3 days ago, but the effects aren't going away. Yesterday, I knew exactly when the captain was going to call for a course correction. Not because I heard the order, but because I felt his decision forming in his mind 20 feet away in the conning tower. The dissolution of individual psychological boundaries created operational advantages that impressed Dr. Fleming's research team, but also generated phenomena that couldn't be explained by conventional science. Kowalski continued. During my sonar watch last night, I started picking up sounds that weren't showing up on the instruments. Rhythmic patterns in the ocean noise that sounded almost like breathing. Massive, slow breathing coming from somewhere far below us. By week 11, Kowalski reported complete psychological integration with other crew members that eliminated the distinction between individual minds. I'm losing track of which thoughts are mine. This morning I started heading to the galley for breakfast, but realized I wasn't hungry. Patterson was hungry, and somehow I was responding to his appetite instead of my own. The crew's collective consciousness began experiencing physical sensations simultaneously, regardless of individual location within the submarine. During yesterday's dive to 700 feet, half the crew experienced phantom pains in our ears simultaneously, even though we were nowhere near the pressure limits. It's like we're becoming one organism with 96 different nervous systems. Most disturbing was Kowalski's growing awareness that the submarine's enhanced collective consciousness had attracted attention from something that existed in the ocean depths. The sounds from below are getting stronger. I'm not the only one hearing them now. Martinez mentioned something big down there during his sonar watch. The captain has ordered us to maintain current depth and avoid any unnecessary noise. Week 12 brought the crisis that forced Dr. Fleming to terminate her experiments. Last night, 23 crew members simultaneously reported seeing the same figure walking through the submarine, a man in an unfamiliar uniform who seemed to pass through bulkheads like they weren't there. Security searched the entire boat twice, no unauthorized personnel aboard. The collective experience is extended beyond shared hallucinations to include memories that belong to other crew members. Dr. Fleming is asking a lot of questions about our families, our childhood memories. She seems particularly interested in whether we're remembering things that happened to other crew members, as if they happened to us. I am, and it's terrifying. Kowalski's final entry documented the presence that their collective consciousness had apparently contacted in the ocean depths. The presence below us is getting closer. It's not something in the ocean, it's something aware, something that's been waiting down there in the deep trenches, and somehow our minds reaching out to each other has caught its attention. The emergency that terminated Project Deepwatch occurred on day 87 of the mission. Dr. Fleming locked herself in her quarters, claiming the experiment had achieved unintended contact with external consciousness entities. She was heard talking to someone through the bulkhead, though her quarters were confirmed empty during security searches. Dr. Fleming locked herself in her quarters 12 hours ago, Kowalski wrote during the submarine's emergency ascent to periscope depth. The captain has ordered an immediate return to port. The sonar is picking up something massive following us from below, something that matches our speed and course changes exactly. Martinez swears it's been there since week 10, just beyond our detection range. Kowalski's journal concluded with a realization that the crew's consciousness expansion had created a permanent connection to whatever entity they had contacted in the deep ocean. We're all thinking the same thought now, without the exercises, without trying. We know what's down there in the deep places. We know it's been waiting for minds that could reach far enough to touch it. And we know that when we surface, we're bringing part of it back with us. The Blackfin returned to Naval Base Kitsap 3 days ahead of schedule. Official records attribute the early return to equipment malfunction requiring immediate repair. Dr. Fleming's experimental logs remain classified above top-secret clearance levels, and all crew members were debriefed and cleared for continued service within 30 days. However, Navy medical records reveal that within 2 years of the mission, 43 of the Blackfin's crew had requested transfer to shore duty, citing adjustment difficulties with submarine service. The submarine itself was decommissioned 6 months later and sold for scrap, unusually early for a vessel of its class and condition. If Kowalski's account represents accurate testimony, Project Deepwatch may have achieved contact with consciousness that exists in the ocean depths, consciousness that followed the crew back to the surface world. Whether that contact represents a breakthrough in understanding human potential or a dangerous breach of barriers that protect humanity from entities beyond our comprehension remains sealed in files that may never see public release. 3 decades of classified research, 3 different approaches to expanding human consciousness, 3 disturbing patterns of contact with entities that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding of reality. Each experiment began with reasonable military objectives: enhanced battlefield awareness, psychological resilience under isolation, improved crew coordination during extended deployments. Each program ended abruptly when subjects reported achieving direct contact with consciousness that existed beyond the boundaries of normal human perception. The consistency of these accounts across different eras, facilities, and research methodologies suggests something more complex than predictable psychological responses to extreme conditions. Sensory deprivation, isolation, and confinement can certainly generate hallucinations and dissociative episodes. Standard military psychology textbooks contain extensive documentation of these phenomena. But the specific nature of what subjects experienced, independent consciousness possessing separate knowledge, entities existing in spaces between normal reality, presences following subjects back to conventional environments. These details align too closely across separate programs to be easily dismissed as expected psychological dysfunction. Perhaps most troubling is the pattern of program terminations. Each experiment concluded suddenly when subjects reported breakthrough contact with external entities. In the corporate world of defense contracting, research programs represent significant investments in time, resources, and personnel. Military bureaucracy doesn't typically abandon promising research without compelling reasons. The fact that each facility was either abandoned or converted to other uses within months of program termination suggests that researchers discovered something that convinced them to cease exploration immediately. This implies that military scientists, professionals trained to push boundaries and explore dangerous territories in service of national defense, encountered phenomena that frightened them enough to abandon potentially revolutionary discoveries. In the classified world of military research, few discoveries are considered too dangerous to pursue. The fact that these consciousness expansion programs were terminated rather than transferred to higher classification levels suggests that what subjects encountered was genuinely beyond the military's ability to control or contain. The human cost of these programs extends far beyond the immediate psychological impact on participants. Many subjects experienced lasting effects that influenced their families, careers, and ability to function in normal society. They volunteered to serve their country through military research, not to become unwitting explorers of consciousness, territories that may have been better left unexplored. Sergeant Chen continues to sense invisible presences decades after his Fort Bragg experiences. Technical Sergeant Morrison's Charlie apparently accompanied her beyond her Nevada isolation. Petty Officer Kowalski and his fellow submariners may have brought something back from the ocean depths that follows them still. These files represent only a fraction of the consciousness research conducted during the Cold War era. How many other experiments achieved similar results? How many other facilities housed research that ventured into territories beyond conventional science? How many other military personnel made contact with entities existing in the spaces between normal human awareness? The declassified documents we've examined tonight provide official confirmation that these experiments occurred. They offer tantalizing glimpses of research that pushed human consciousness to its limits and perhaps beyond. But they also raise questions that may be more disturbing than their answers. If these encounters were genuine contact with external consciousness, rather than psychological artifacts of extreme conditions, what happened to the entities that made contact with human minds through military research programs? Did they remain contained within those classified facilities, or did they accompany the subjects back into the broader world? And perhaps most importantly, if military researchers stumbled onto doorways between dimensions of consciousness, who or what might be waiting on the other side? Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. They can only be classified, sealed, and forgotten by those with the authority to bury uncomfortable truths. But consciousness, like water, finds its way through the smallest cracks in even the most carefully constructed barriers. If these accounts from the classified archives have left you questioning what other secrets remain buried in military files, subscribe for more true stories from the shadows of American military history. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous discoveries are the ones our government tried hardest to forget. Disclaimer: these stories are presented as submitted accounts and declassified documentation. Interpretations may vary. Content is for entertainment purposes and does not represent official military or government positions on the events described.